right, welcome in. This is the Individual Skills Hockey Podcast, a podcast that aims to bring quality education to youth hockey coaches, parents, and players with the mission of having a positive impact on the crazy youth hockey world. Today we are at the Center for Sports and Mind with Hans Skulstad, and we are so lucky to have you in, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
So my first question, I kind of ask everyone what your kind of background or how you got into this line of work and what led you to this profession. Maybe you can say what you do here. And
yeah, so I'm the co-owner with my wife Jenny of the Center for Sports and the Mind, and we also own another business, Foundations Counseling Services. We've owned both those businesses since around 06, 07. We actually met at the same practice. We were doing in-home therapy with juvenile delinquents and their families. And even during that time, I was always getting athletes and hockey players as clients. And then one year, the story I often tell where I really decided to be more intentional and create the Center for Sports and the Mind was we were watching my niece play in a fifth grade girls basketball game. And coach from the other team stopped the game with like a minute left in the first half. And he went over to the scorers table and was just losing his mind. And it was a longer process than I thought it should be, and it turned out that what he wanted is he wanted the score change from 34-4 to 36-4 in his favor. And then the game went on, and they got towards the end, and with like 2 minutes, he puts his starters back in and says we need, and everybody in the gym can hear him say we need to break 60. They break 60, and he celebrates like they won in overtime. It was a Sunday morning friendship game. And so like for fifth or sixth place. And I remember when that game got over, I was getting up and I got a pinch on the back of my arm from my wife, and she said, "Don't do it." And I'm like, "Don't do what?" She goes, "I know you want to go give him a piece of your mind, but it's not going to work." And she was right. And so the conversation on the way home was, what can we do about this? And so then we started it. And the intention at the time was to make the game better for kids, for her, our nieces and nephews. And then it turned out that I was doing the same thing for my son. And, you know, I can tell you after watching him play youth hockey, now plays high school hockey, like I can give you all kinds of stories of stuff like that has happened either in baseball, hockey, or golf for him. And there's still definitely a need for all those things because it is, like, as you said, like, a lot of times youth hockey can be, like, a great place for kids to grow and develop. And for the most part, it is. But, you know, you got a few people on the fringes there that can really, you know, change the experience. So that's what I did. I jumped in and started doing that. I did coaching clinics for Minnesota Hockey High School Coaches Association. That's how I met Coach O'Leary, and I was on the Hobie Baker High School Character Award Committee and still am. And I got to know coaches that way, just kept presenting and talking to them. And then, you know, I've worked with numerous high school programs and youth programs over the years. And probably the thing that really put me on the map was within the hockey community was I worked with both Wayzata and Benilde when Jack Jablonski got hurt, and after that I had street cred. So that's how I got into the business. In a way it was kind of by accident, but on purpose at the same time. And you know, it's been a great ride. I've gotten to do a lot of things, meet a lot of cool people, be in a lot of really fun situations. It's turned the way that I look at hockey and sports in general differently. I've had kids playing each other in state championship games at the X. I've had kids playing against each other, Gophers versus Wisconsin and other things. So for me, I really don't look at sports anymore as an us versus them thing. I look at it like I'll watch a game and I'll watch for the individual players that I work with, sometimes playing against each other, but it's really been a great evolution of the way that I look at things, and really enjoyed the process, getting to know coaches, players all over the country.
That's awesome. And I was actually part of that team on Wayzata.
I wondered about that.
It was a 2012 season, and I was a senior. So I remember you being very helpful through those really tragic and difficult times for everybody else involved in the situation. You know, the players with both teams and helping to handle that. But so that's when I really, you know, started to respect you. You know, I was an 18-year-old kid, but as going to coaching clinics and hearing you talk over and over, I think started to realize how important this stuff is. And but I wanted to ask you that story you told about the basketball game. How long ago was that? Or what?
Oh, geez. Well, my niece is 30.
Okay.
And she was in 5th grade, so I don't know, what does that make her? Like, that's probably 15. I mean, I've been practicing for over 20 years, close to 25, so
I
been
asked,
a long time.
I asked that, and I was curious to see how you think the trends have been going for that type of stuff in youth hockey world. Is it getting better or getting worse for instances like that?
Boy. Probably. This is what I would say in general. In hockey, youth hockey, but in sports in general, one of the things I've noticed, and, you know, I'm over 50 years old, and so I just have in general seen the level or the inability for people to stay calm and composed over that time period is getting harder and harder for people to manage. I just think, you know, all you have to do is watch any sports on TV, and you can see that the number of like big dust ups seems to be more and more frequent. And, you know, I mean, I've seen things in, you know, youth hockey that I'm just like, why did you think that was smart? Like, I can think of, you know, I hear stories all the time from people about things that happen. I do think the thing that I'm encouraged about and I see that's positive is the work that I do is now more generally accepted. I think it's even different than when you played high school. I think it was that was the cusp of where it started. But I also think that what's happened is over time and the pandemic, one of the silver linings is talking about mental health became more acceptable. But we also don't have, like, my generations of parents don't have the skills to teach kids how to do that. And so I think that those two things are going to catch up. I'm optimistic that we can now talk about it and change it. To be honest with you, the biggest problem the problem usually I see is not the kids, it's usually the parents and their inability to separate or understand that their child is not a direct reflection of them, at least when they're playing hockey.
Yeah, and you mentioned the acceptance thing, and I can remember when I played, there'd be, you know, we'd get wind that somebody might be going to see you, or you know, we're not supposed to know that information, but if we did get wind of it, I remember people would kind of be like, ooh, like, why do you need that stuff? But I think that's completely changed now, like you said. I mean, I don't think that really goes on today.
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, all 4 of the major professional leagues actually have collectively bargained that they have someone on staff, and it's more and more common in college programs. But it's also like it's not. It's kind of viewed as an extra, and like smaller programs. You know, like, or D3 or like other smaller Division I hockey or other programs, a lot of times struggle for the resources for that, and that's one thing that I think needs to change.
Right, for sure. So in our talk here, I kind of wanted to bucket. You know, I started this podcast as for advice for coaches, parents, and players. Like I said in the intro, I kind of wanted to bucket it with you in those 3 categories, and we can start with players, and I think we'll just talk about what players have to deal with generally when they're preparing or during a hockey game. What are some of the things that they have to deal with mentally?
Well, mentally, most kids, it doesn't matter the level, they all want to do a good job, and that's the source of strong or challenging emotions. And what I would say is, if you think about the way that emotions or mental performance has been approached, is like I do lots of presentations, and one of the questions I ask, and I actually formally do this through a Google form. I ask the kids, and even kids at HP, how many total hours of detailed coaching have you gotten on how to manage your mind during games? 75% of them say it's less than an hour. So what they're left to do is learn how to manage all that stuff by learning from their peers or what they learn on the playground. So the information that they have is inaccurate. And so when they get to that point, a lot of them think that those emotions mean they can't play well. And so part of my job is to help them to normalize what they're feeling, accept that it's part of the game, and learn how to play through it. And if you remember when I worked with you guys, like one of the things that we talked about was like how to reboot your brain. And what I teach kids how to do is, okay, so you reboot your brain with a series of physical activities like eye movements, your hands, breathing, counting down from 200 by sevens, reading a sign on the boards and reading and spelling it backwards. Those are all things that help to reboot your brain. And I recommend that you do that every shift, no matter how effective it was or ineffective it was. And the other thing like I try to teach kids is, hey, we don't talk about good or bad. We talk about effective or impactful or ineffective or not impactful, because a lot of times what people end up doing is those words, good and bad, are easily confused, and a lot of time the default that your brain interprets that is what I did was bad, which means I am bad or I am good. So I try to help them have a language and develop systems to help them play through the difficult or challenging emotions that go with it.
Right, and that brain reboot can help with preventing, I think you talked about it earlier, like when you see someone, you say like the wires crossed, that procedure that you're giving athletes to do helps prevent something like that, correct?
Yeah, it helps them to like interrupt the process. A lot of us, like when we get hit with an emotion, go into kind of like an emotional slide where we start to think the worst, and evolution has wired us to be prepared for the negative or the worst. And, modern life means that you have to learn how to stop that slide so that you continue to be in the just play zone and play in the moment and have both your thinking and feeling brain talking with one another. And that's the most simplest strategy for in-game or in practice. In the long term, the other thing that I like to help or that kids need to learn how to do is develop a change system so that they can actually change the mental model at which they look at themselves while experiencing strong emotions.
Right. Awesome. I'm curious, when we're talking about players and all of this stuff, comparing it to other sports, I think a lot of people out there think like golf or tennis or the individual sports, this is so much more important. I have a feeling what you're going to say, but is that true? And are team sports just as important for these types of strategies for athletes? Yes,
because here's the thing. If you can get if you have a team of 20 people and you can make them all 1% better, it doesn't mean your team is 20% better. And I don't know the math on it, but if you think about it from an exponential perspective, if everybody's 101, 1% of 101 is not 102. So, it is very important. The other thing that I think is really important, one of the things I learned from reading one of Phil Jackson's book is, he used a lot of mindfulness with the Bulls and the Lakers. And I think that can be a very helpful approach in sports. But the thing that I took away from it that I really thought was important was they all had the same system for how they were going to refocus themselves and get back together. And in team sports, that's what's really important, is that everybody's on the same page about how we're going to do that and recognizing when things are too tense or too relaxed.
Yeah, and I can think about what I deal with and what we deal with at the high school level. You think about like momentum in games, and how one bad thing happens, it seems like 4 or 5 happen right after it, which is what we're talking about here. So I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more about, from a team setting, how do we stop those? Because every coach is always trying to tell we want to stay even keeled, never too high, never too low. So what are some comments?
What I often have teams do is, so one thing you can do is you can have an inside joke or a joke that makes everybody laugh, so that you can use that as a way to shift the momentum, interrupt the tension, pop the balloon that goes with it. I think the other thing is that like a technique I've often used, and there's some teams that I've worked with that have what we did very first time I came and met with them is, and I think we did this with your team, a guided visualization about 4 words that represented them playing their best, right? And then you use those 4 words as, a trigger to get back into the right mind. And that's an effective thing. I also think the most important thing in that situation when you're coaching, and I don't care what level we're talking about, if you take on that momentum and you don't you have to model what you want, and you have to be aware of what gets you out, and you also have to be aware of what gets kids out.
Yeah. Yep. I'm curious on preparation for games. Visualization, I think everyone understands its importance, especially at the higher levels, but maybe some strategies for effective visualization before a game.
Well, what I would do, and what I do, or what I often have my athletes do, is pick out those 4 words, kind of do a progressive relaxation, and then picture themselves playing in the way that they would like. Now, you got to be careful about how detailed you get, right? And one thing that a lot of kids think is that if I visualize playing this way, like I'm going to walk so-and-so, no. I mean, that's kind of like, praying to God for a brand new Mercedes, right?
And that's kind of like old school, like coaches would tell us, like, if you want to visualize scoring, then like visualize actually catching a pass on the right side and putting it over the goalie's shoulder. But sounds like that's not.
Well, where I think that you can do that, and that's fine to do that. At the same time, where kids get stuck is when they go out on their ice and the visualization doesn't match what's happening on the ice, and it's a general, like, the whole idea of it is, the brain can't distinguish between what's real and imagined. So the more you visualize yourself doing something, like they've done studies of people who, like dart throwers or free throw shooters, people who didn't practice, people who practiced just shooting free throws, people who visualized and half the time free throws, visualize it in the other half, and the group that performed the best was the half and half. So it can work, but the other mental filter that a lot of kids and coaches use is, well, it doesn't work if it doesn't work perfectly. And you have to change your expectation about that. Yeah. And you also have to remember that, like, at the higher levels of sports you go, like the higher you get up the bell curve, the harder it is to, the more boring but beneficial things you have to do to create change.
So kind of one last thing on the player side of things is a post-game. I'm curious about how should players be thinking about what just occurred, and how does that set them up for maybe the next day of practice or the week? Well,
so sometimes the old school Cold War coaching would say, like, beat yourself up, pain and punishment, like those are some of the mental toughness traps, that pain and punishment is the way to get better. And certainly there's going to be, like, you have to allow yourself to have some negative emotion if it doesn't go your way. But you also have to get yourself back to a more even keel place in the way that you evaluate your game. What I tell kids and what I tell NHL or college players is, okay, what's your system for, like, how do you evaluate your games, and can you do it without inserting emotion into it? And if you can't, then you need to wait till longer, or wait longer, or figure out like how to calm yourself down in between. But after games, what I would say is, it's a good idea to watch film, but also like simple things like, okay, 3 highlights when you want back. Or another good thing to do after a game is, okay, what was I trying to do in this particular play? What did I do, and what could I do differently, without necessarily like being more descriptive and noticing, rather than making a value judgment about the play. Because the reality is hockey is a game of mistakes, and my job, if you're playing D, my job is to make you make a mistake, right, and make you uncomfortable. So sometimes that's going to happen. And if you have a process for learning from yourself and knowing how to forgive yourself, you'll do a lot better, and you'll be better prepared. You got to let it go, because you can't change it.
Right. Awesome stuff. Okay, so let's shift to some advice for coaches and how to do this stuff a little bit better. I think most coaches have good intentions.
Yep.
But I think that's a blanket statement. I think there's a very, very small minority that is in it for the wrong reasons. However, I think a lot of coaches are very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and because of that, sometimes the emotions get the best of them during games.
Yep.
What are some strategies for coaches on staying the course and not
losing it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you got to know what pushes your buttons and why. And then you got to figure out how you're going to disconnect them. Okay? So I would say the biggest thing that I have seen, and so I think that the biggest thing that I've seen watching, I was the hockey development coordinator at Armstrong Cooper for 6.5 years. So, I've seen and heard about a lot of different things from, our own association and others. And I would say the biggest thing that coaches need to be aware of is, all right, what's your mental state like going into this? What do you need to let go of? And then the other thing is becoming aware of your pattern and how to actually reboot your brain and not let things get to you, and having your own self-calming techniques. Sometimes, coaches are human. Sometimes your ability to keep that together, may be compromised by stuff that's going on in your own life, and, you need to make accommodations for that. But the other thing that a simple thing is making sure that you can answer yes to the question, am I being who I want to be? And that really comes back down to values and making, I've found as a hockey parent, if I went to my son's games and I got kicked out or was yelling at referees, that would destroy my credibility for what I do, right? And it's also not the way I want to be. So for me, every time I went to a game, no matter how big it was, I knew who I wanted to be, and I knew how far or how emotional I was going to get. And I also think the other thing is like there were times, like when my wife pinched me on the arm, that like if your buttons get pushed, if you and I are coaching together, you and I need to have like a code word for me to say to you, Miles, like, calm down, right? That's another strategy.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned taking stock of how you feel that day is so big. I deal with it all the time. Sometimes I'll show up to the rink and I just won't feel good for whatever reason. Maybe it was a bad day. And sometimes I'll skate over to Pat and say that to him and say, like, I'm close. Like, something's going to tick me off today. So just be aware of that and, like, try to help me through it.
Yeah.
Or maybe, like, don't do a drill that, like, that I get upset at when we do it wrong or something like that. So I think that stuff is is huge, just to know how you are going in.
Yep, absolutely.
What about how the coaches can help players? I think the toughest thing I don't know if it's the toughest thing, but when a player loses confidence and is just really down in the dumps, how do coaches help that player?
Well, first of all, you got to validate how they feel and that you can understand why it's that way. But they're already thinking in their head that they should have confidence, or it doesn't make sense that they have confidence, right? So I think that that's one of the worst things that you can do. But one of the things I have found really effective for players is, having conversations about what you need to do ahead of time, what will get you back out of your head, get you back into the world, so that they have that. But I also think, in validating that process, and this has really changed in my profession since I started. The way that it used to be is, if you come to see me, you don't get to know anything about me because I'm supposed to be like this perfect person that's going to help you become perfect, right? And the thing that I think is most helpful for kids is when you can flatten the hierarchy in those situations and be like, hey, tell a story of, hey, this is a time when I was playing a sport that I lost my confidence, and here's what I did to get it back, or here's what I was thinking. Because a lot of times they feel alone in that, right? And especially when they have been where you've been and you can share those stories, it really kind of takes the heat and the pressure off. And that's the biggest thing. The other thing I'd say is, the most influential people in my life are the people who took the time to build solid relationships with me, and I knew that they had my back, that they liked me as a person, and that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, you hear that a lot with kind of the analogy of putting coins in the piggy bank.
Yep.
And that's done beforehand, and then you have stuff in there, currency, in the moment. I'm curious on in-game coaching or critiquing players. Is there a place for it, and how do you do it effectively so that you're not making it worse?
Well, here's what I'd say about that. In general, when I've worked with kids who have played in the high school hockey tournament, and I'll use goalies in particular, I tell them they can watch the goal one time or less on the big screen. And they'll be like, why? And I'm like, at the X at the state tournament is not the time that you watch film, okay? And that's not the time that you're going to be able to figure out how to correct your technique, okay? So what I'd say in in-game coaching is, if you're going to give a critique, first of all, the tone is important, right? It needs to sound helpful and constructive. You need to read the kid and whether or not they're in a place to take your criticism or constructive criticism. And then I also think that what you give, if it's too hard for them to, integrate in that moment, right? And because sometimes there are some things that you could tell kids, it's kind of like evaluating hockey sense. And sometimes you can't evaluate hockey sense because a player's not fast enough to be in the right place, right? So I think you have to give them something simple and small. The other way that I kind of think about that I think coaches need to think, one of the things that drives me crazy at hockey games that parents do is they yell instructions to their kid. And it drives me crazy for two reasons, okay? One is, if you've played, more than likely your kid's not going to hear it. Two, by the time you say it, it's already too late. And three, the research says that when you do that, that's too much to process in one particular moment, and they're much more likely to mess up.
We call those joystick coaches. That's what I call them. They want a joystick on the players on the ice.
Yeah, yeah, and that rarely works, and kids hate that.
Yeah. Okay, I think. Let me see. Oh, there was one more coach's question I had. A scenario. Let's say you have a kid that is struggling to understand why they're not getting opportunities. And I'm thinking more at the higher levels, because youth hockey is your opportunities are going to be pretty much guaranteed in the most of the time. But how do coaches better communicate, or what is a good strategy to use or level of honesty to use in those types of situations on why they're not good enough right now?
Well, I think first you need to communicate that you can see a possibility. I mean, it really kind of depends. Like, you know, if you have a scenario where there's just no way that person is really going to be able to surpass a certain player or a certain number of players, like, I think you just need to be straight up honest with them and tell them it's not anything you're not doing. It's not your effort. It's not this, it's not that. It's just that this is the scenario, and this is who we believe gives us the best chance to win. Now, I do think that there is, I mean, I have seen it where, you know, where players, there are opportunities to play the players that are not as skilled, and I think periodically you need to throw them a bone in situations where that happens. But I really think transparency and honesty in that scenario is the most important thing, because, I mean, I've seen that. Like, there are kids where the kid wants an opportunity, they may not be able to see, and you have to judge, too. The other part of it is you have to judge, like, how equipped are they to handle that, and sometimes it may mean that you have to give them the criticism or the feedback in a gentle way, and they may not be able to hear it, because they may also, like, have a different assessment of their own play, or the other thing is they also may have other people telling them, you know, and I think it's also sometimes a fit and a style thing too, and you can tell players that. But right. That's sticky, you know. That's sticky in youth and high school. It's not as sticky in college or pro, because the rules are different.
What do you mean by sticky?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like there's no good way to tell somebody they have BO.
Yeah.
Right? But the landscape of, because college players are older or professional athletes are older, like when you're dealing with high school players, you also have to be aware of all the other factors that surround that and how they're going to hear that. And I think, you know, a lot of times as adults we make the mistake of forgetting that kids think we think in the same language as them, right? So what that ends up meaning is, like the story I've often told about this is, when I first met my wife, we met some of her family, and they had an 18-year-old daughter, and she brought her boyfriend over, and we met him, Miles, for maybe a total of 45 seconds. And she asked us what we thought of him. And we said he had nice manners. And she said, well, why can't you just say he's hot? And so her language for trust, respect, and love was, why can't you say he's hot? Right? But, I mean, that's not, you know, as an adult, like, I'm not going to say, and my wife's not going to say, that a 17-year-old boy is hot. Right?
Yeah,
so, right.
All right, you brought up, I think in your last answer, you brought up some other outside influences on athletes. So I wanted to talk about parents now.
Okay.
And the specific question that I thought of on the way over here was, how do parents handle successes and failures? How should they handle those successes and failures after a game, let's say?
Well, here's what I would say. There's a guy named John O'Sullivan who runs the Changing the Game project, and the thing that he says is, the most important thing you can say to a kid after they play a game is, I love watching you play. So, you know, the older they get, like, I can't tell you the number of kids that have told me that they hate the car ride home, right? And I think in that scenario, right, like, the older they get, the younger they are, the more they're going to take that personally, right? But one of the things that I have done, my wife and I have done throughout our child's youth career in any of the sports. So, like, and our son is a really good player. So, and a lot of people don't know this, but what I would often do in the stands is if he scored, I'd say, "Oh, that's my parenting," and with a little chest puff, right? But if he turned the puck over and it led to a goal, that's Jenny's parenting. Okay. Now, there were two purposes in doing that. One was to manage my own thought process that his success was a direct reflection of me as a parent. Now, I can give my kid the resources, the equipment, send him to training, do all the things, tell him like what he needs to do to play the way that he wants to play and have the success and meet his goals. Sure, I can do that, okay? But the idea that his performance in anything is a 100% reflection on me is ludicrous, okay? So the other reason that I would do that, and I remember actually when they were in Little League, I had a buddy, our kids played against each other, one of my best friends, and I said, they were playing against each other. His son struck out my son, and I said, "Oh, I guess you're the better parent." And then my son hit a double, and I'm like, "Well, now we're even." Okay? But the reason that I would do that in the stands was also for the parents, and it became a running joke. And what it did, and what I believe it did, is it took the air out of the balloon of all the tension, right? And so I think that the most important thing that you can do, if anything, I would err on the side of less feedback, because they know when they've made mistakes, and I think that, like I said, they think in their own terms. Well, little kids view anger as you don't like me, right? So I just think that the most important thing is understanding what pushes your buttons and what doesn't. And also, one thing that I've seen from some parents is they have perfectionistic expectations of effort. They may say that they don't have perfectionistic expectations of how they play, and I think that's true, right? But you can't have a perfectionistic expectation about attitude and effort, especially when they're young, because, for squirt age kids, game's over, and by the time they get to you, they don't even care. They're better.
Well, the NHL, professional hockey is the only time you really see that consistency of effort.
Well, yeah, but even there you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? There are, in professional sports all the time, there isn't consistency of effort, and if there was a secret to that, then I'd be super rich.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, I'm gonna tell you a story or kind of describe how my parents kind of handled things, and then you can give me your assessment.
Okay.
They're gonna listen to the podcast. So first of all, they were great parents. And what I appreciated in hindsight about how they treated the car ride home was the response was always the same. And when I did have a really good game, they would, good game. That was awesome.
Yep.
Loved watching you play. But they never got super excited about something I did on the ice. And I remember when I was a sophomore and I was just starting out on the varsity team at Wayzata, it was the 4th or 5th game of the year. We're playing Bloomington Jefferson, and I finally got to play against the top line of Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big deal for me. And I just remember that night, my dad was just like, "Good game. That was great." And it was nothing. And I remember thinking at the time, this is actually a big deal. Why didn't I get more there? But in hindsight, for me, that really helped, because then the next game, I wasn't seeking that overly excited affirmation. I always knew it was the same, no matter how I played. And I think a lot of parents out there understand that, you don't want to yell at your kid on the way home.
Mm-hmm.
But when they have a hat trick, don't get so excited and proud and make it such a big deal that when that doesn't happen the next time, they're not getting it.
a lot of times what I see in those scenarios and what's good about what your parent did, so that whole idea of it's my parenting or it's Jenny's parenting when he does something good or bad, okay? So here's the deal. If I have seen parents who get ahead of themselves with their kids' success, and what you're talking about there is it wasn't that, like, so when, well, I don't know if we talked about this when I worked with you. I think we did. So a lot of times what ends up happening is I've worked with some kids who've been told, you know what, as like first-year Bantams, you're going to get our high school program to the state tournament. You're that good, okay? And in a couple of cases, like that program getting to the state tournament was probably not very realistic, like in high school, maybe in youth hockey. But when we give kids the message that they're a natural, right, or that they are like destined to be great, what ends up happening is when you label someone a natural, the alternative is you're a bust. And so if you have a bad game, then you're a bust and you suck, right? And the other thing that happens when you label someone a natural is that gives them the idea that their future road is paved with gold and it's going to be easy to get there, and that discounts hard work. And I can't tell you the number of kids who have been told that at a young age and they stop doing the work that got them there because they think it's all just going to come to them naturally because it's either like, you know, and so what your parents did there is they didn't make you into a natural. They didn't make you into a bust, but, you know, it's kind of like you can't deify kids, and sometimes that happens, and that doesn't work because then what ends up happening is kids get objectified.
Well, 100%, and I believe we have a huge like labeling problem at the 10-year-old, let's say 10-year-old hockey right now, where I get calls all the time. I've said this a million times, but I get calls from AAA coaches sometimes and say, give me your best, number of your best 2012 birth year. And I used to just like give them the number, but now I think I always respond with like, they're 10 years old. They're all bad. I could beat them. Like they're not good at hockey yet, but they're outperforming their peers right now. So, but when that kid gets labeled good, it has effect on him, and it also is telling everyone else that they suck, right?
Yes.
So that's a huge issue, I think, and something we need to just continue to be mindful of.
Yeah, well, talent identification at 10 is kind of ridiculous. Because think about it this way, okay? It's not quite the same, but two football players, one's Patrick Mahomes as a youth, and the other one's not. Okay, well, so, like, there could be some kids that are ahead, and I'm not saying this happened with him, but his dad was a Major League Baseball player, all kinds of resources. He at 10 may look better than the kid that doesn't have those financial resources or the ability to play all the time or, specialize at the age of 10 or whatever. But sometimes, there's two things at that age. If you're a big kid at 10, you can be dominant, but that's going to expire if you don't stay skilled.
Right, 100%. Last question I had on parents is kind of more about deciding whether or not to come and see somebody like you. Maybe, I don't know, just generally, how do you approach that decision?
Well, okay, that can be a challenging that's a challenging question for parents because some kids take it the wrong way. Okay, I think it's all about how you talk about it and your own attitude about it. And I think that if you're this is what I would say. There is a certain kind of profile of kids who end up here, and that's not a good or a bad thing, but most of the time it's parents who believe in this process and value the process because they've been through it themselves or seen the value. I think that there are some kids who end up showing up here, and the reason that they end up showing up here is they want to be better, and their parents are going to help them to be better, and they know that I can tell them things that are going to land differently than if they said it. It happens in parenting all the time. And then there are some situations. So if your kid continually struggles and is stuck at a plateau and you're not exactly sure what to do, or if they've been in a situation or are in an environment that doesn't support them or is, challenging for them to perform in, that's another sign that you might need some help. If there's a sudden change in their love of their sport or wanting to go to practice or being involved or practice habits at home, that's another good reason to come. I mean, in general, what I would say is every youth athlete, whether they have you don't have to be sick to get better, could benefit from coming to see someone like me. Because what I provide is information and experience that helps kids to understand how to do it different, and they haven't gotten detailed coaching. And what I would do is, if I was a parent, I would frame it up as, this is another kind of skills coach, and that's how you do it.
Right, and I'm curious so somebody comes to see you, can their improvement be a period of time, and then they're good, and then they, not good, everyone's gonna, but does it need to be an ongoing thing throughout their career?
Yes and no. It depends. But in general, what I see is there are kids who can come and see me 3 times that will see value and get better. The more time you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. Okay? And what I would say is I have worked with kids. I can think of a kid who's playing pro hockey now. I met him when he was a second-year Pee-wee. Okay? And when I first saw him, I saw him right after his youth season was over, and probably saw him somewhere between 6 to 15 times. And those got further and further apart. At the beginning, they're more close together. And then periodically, like in high school and in college, there'd be a certain challenge that would come up. I get a text, can I come in and see you? One thing about that kid is he always came in with a list of notes on his phone, which I just loved, right? So, yes, it can be, but a lot, like basically what I do is I help them to design their own system for mental fitness. And I say that purposely because a lot of times mental toughness is a hijacked subjective term. And so I help them to develop the systems that they need to play through strong emotions during competition. And then I help them to identify the mental models they need to change so that's easier. And then we create an ongoing self-care plan. And part of the education at the end is, how are you going to know when you need to come back to see me?
Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or?
No, not really. I mean, I just enjoy talking about this stuff. I know that what I do is really important. I know God put me on this earth to do it. I've done it for a long time. I love it. It's a passion of mine. One of the things that I have thought about a lot lately, in the last year, I've lost a godmother and a father. I also had a client die recently, and when I look back and think about that, and as I age, I want to make sure that I make the game better and leave it better than what I found it. And so my goal is to share this message wherever I can, because we can't talk about it too much. And I just think it's really important that we give kids the skills and the opportunities and the ability to access this information so that they can use it in their own way. And I just don't think there's enough, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point with this, because of the stigmas that are out there, that we can talk about it too much.
Awesome. Well, again, I really appreciate you sitting down with me, and maybe we can do another one in the future and dive deeper into different topics.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.